am Samira. For 32 years, my life was defined by the heat and noise of Marrakesh. My world was vibrant, terracotta walls, the scent of cumin and exhaust, the chaotic symphony of the souks, and the constant, loving, suffocating weight of my family. I was the good daughter, the one who stayed. My sisters had married, my brothers had moved to France. But Samira was the pillar. But pillars, if you stare at them long enough, are just stone. They don't move. They don't breathe. They just hold things up until they crack. I needed to breathe. So, when the agency found a placement for a governess in the Isle of Skye, I didn't just apply. I ran. I packed my life into 2 suitcases, leaving behind the whispers of my aunts who claimed a woman without a husband was a woman without a destiny. Hold on just a moment before we continue. If this story is touching something in you, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. It genuinely makes a difference and helps me bring you more stories like this one. I also want to hear from you. Write in the comments, where are you right now? Are you tucked away in a peaceful village where stars fill the sky, or surrounded by the hum and glow of a city that never sleeps? I arrived in Scotland on a Tuesday that felt like twilight even though it was noon. The sky wasn't blue, it was a bruising shade of violet and steel. The air didn't just touch you, it bit. It smelled of salt, peat, and ancient rain. Blackwood Manor stood alone on a cliff, overlooking a sea that looked angry. It was a beautiful, intimidating beast of a house, Gothic stone, ivy that looked like veins, and windows that watched you approach. This was the home of the Hawthorns. Julianne Hawthorne opened the door. If the house was stone, she was glass, sharp, polished, and terrifyingly fragile. She was a high-profile architect, a woman who built skyscrapers in London, but couldn't seem to build a home here. She wore a silk blouse that cost more than my father's car, and she looked at me not with unkindness, but with a distraction so profound it felt like dismissal. "Samira," she said, checking her watch. "You're on time." "I like that. We value precision here." She didn't ask about my journey. She didn't ask who I was. She handed me a tablet with a color-coded calendar. "Alistair is in the studio," she said, waving a hand toward the back of the house. "He handles the atmosphere. I handle the logistics. The twins, Leo and Freya, are hiding somewhere. Good luck." And then there was Alistair. I met him an hour later. I was wandering the drafty corridors, trying to find the nursery, when I found the library instead. He was standing on a ladder, fixing a high shelf. He wasn't what I expected. Julianne was all sharp angles and modernity. Alistair looked like he had grown out of the Scottish earth. He wore a heavy wool sweater that had seen better days, and his hair was dark, unruly, dusted with wood shavings. He looked down at me, and for a moment he didn't speak. He just looked. Not the way men in the market looked at me, assessing my value or my virtue. He looked at me with a profound curiosity, like I was a rare bird that had blown off course. "You must be the one brave enough to take the job," he said. His voice was deep, resonant, like a cello string plucked in an empty room. "I'm Samira," I said, clutching my bag. "I'm Alistair." He climbed down, wiping his hand on his trousers before offering it to me. His grip was warm, rough with paint and work. "Welcome to the edge of the world, Samira." The first month was a battle against the cold and the chaos. Leo and Freya were 6-year-old tornadoes. They didn't want a governess, they wanted a playmate, a servant, and a referee. They tested me constantly. They put frogs in my boots. They hid my prayer mat. They mocked my accent. But I had raised 5 younger siblings. I knew that children are like wild animals. They only attack when they are scared or bored. I stopped trying to force them into Julianne's color-coded schedule. Instead, I took them outside. We walked the moors in the rain. I taught them how to make Moroccan mint tea on a portable stove by the cliffs. I told them stories of jinns and desert kings, their eyes wide as I described a sun they couldn't imagine. Slowly, the house began to change. Julianne was rarely there. She was a voice on the phone, a blur of perfume rushing to the airport, a paycheck that arrived on time. She loved her children, I could see that, but she loved them from a distance, like a museum exhibit she was proud to own but afraid to touch. Alistair, however, was always there. He was a landscape painter, but he spent more time staring at the canvas than painting it. He was a man haunting his own life. The shift happened in November. A storm had rolled in off the Atlantic, violent and screaming. The power lines went down, plunging the manor into darkness. The heating died. The house became a freezer. I had gathered the children in the library, the only room with a working fireplace. We were wrapped in blankets, roasting marshmallows. Alistair came in, shaking snow from his coat, carrying an armful of logs. He saw us, me with Freya asleep in my lap, Leo reading by candlelight, the smell of burnt sugar and tea in the air. He stopped in the doorway. And I saw a look of such naked hunger on his face that I almost looked away. Not hunger for food, hunger for warmth. For a home that felt like a home, room for one more. He asked quietly, "Always," I said. He sat on the rug opposite me. The firelight danced across his face, highlighting the early gray in his beard and the sadness in his eyes. "You've done something to this place," he said softly, so he wouldn't wake Freya. "I just lit a fire, Alistair." "No," he shook his head. "It's not the fire, it's the silence. Before you came, the silence in this house was heavy, it was lonely now. It feels peaceful. In my culture," I whispered, "we believe a home is a living thing. If you don't speak to it with love, the walls go cold." He looked at me then, really looked at me, through the flickering orange light. "I think my walls have been cold for a very long time, Samira." That night, the invisible barrier between employer and employee began to dissolve. It wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow erosion, like water wearing down a stone. It was in the mornings. I would be in the kitchen at 6:00 a.m., brewing my coffee, and he would come in, sleepless and tousled. We started sharing that quiet hour before the sun rose. We talked about everything. I told him about the colors of Marrakesh, the chaotic love of my mother, the pressure to be perfect. He told me about his art, about how he felt he was losing his vision, about the loneliness of being married to a woman who was married to her ambition. "She wasn't always like this," he told me once, staring into his mug. "We used to dream the same dreams. Now, I think she dreams in steel and glass, and I'm still dreaming in watercolor." "People change, Alistair. It is the way of things." "Do they?" he asked, turning to me. "Or do we just forget who we are? You haven't forgotten who you are. You carry your home in your voice, in the way you walk. I envy that. I am running from who I am," I admitted, a confession I hadn't even made to myself. "Maybe." He smiled, a sad, crooked thing. "But you're running towards something real. I'm just waiting." Winter deepened. The days became short, dark blinks of gray light. One afternoon I was in the conservatory, watering the few plants that survived the chill. Alistair came in. He didn't say a word. He just stood beside me. The air between us grew thick, charged with static. He reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair behind my ear. His fingers grazed my cheek, rough skin, gentle touch. My breath hitched. I should have stepped back. My faith, my upbringing, my contract. But I didn't. I leaned into his hand, just for a heartbeat. "Samira," he whispered. It sounded like a prayer. "I am in trouble." "I know," I whispered back. "I don't want to be the man who does this," he said, his voice breaking. "I made vows. I honor them. But when you are in the room, the color comes back into the world. When you leave, it turns gray again." "Alistair, we cannot." "I know we cannot," he said, pulling his hand away as if burned. "But knowing doesn't stop the feeling. That was the torture of it. It wasn't a sordid affair. There were no stolen kisses in dark corners. It was an affair of the soul. It was the way he anticipated my needs before I spoke them. It was the way I started cooking his favorite meals without being asked. It was the intimacy of understanding someone without words, and the guilt began to grow. It grew like a weed in my chest, choking me. Julianne came home for Christmas. The contrast was blinding. She was brilliant, efficient, and cold. She brought expensive gifts for the children but didn't know their favorite colors. She kissed Alistair on the cheek, but didn't notice the new sadness in his posture. I watched them at dinner. They sat at opposite ends of a long table. They were planets in different orbits, and I was the gravity pulling him away from her. I realized then that I wasn't just a governess anymore. I was a fracture. The breaking point came in February. It was a night of rare clarity. The sky was clear, studded with 1 billion stars, the Milky Way a smudge of diamond dust above the ocean. I had gone out to the terrace to pray, seeking clarity in the freezing air. When I finished, I found Alistair sitting on the stone bench nearby. He was smoking, a habit he said he'd quit. "You look like a statue," he said, smoke curling from his lips. "Beautiful and unreachable." "I am not unreachable, Alistair. I am right here." He stood up and walked toward me. He stopped inches away. I could feel the heat radiating from him. "That's the problem," he said hoarsely. "You are right here, and I can't have you, and I can't breathe." He reached for my hands. He held them tight. "Run away with me." The words hung in the cold air. "What?" "Run away with me. Let's go to Italy. Or Morocco. Anywhere. I can't stay in this house anymore. I can't be this ghost." For one intoxicating, terrifying second I imagined it, a life with him. A life where I was loved, seen, cherished. But then I looked at the house. I thought of Leo and Freya sleeping upstairs. I thought of Julianne, who was not a villain, just a woman who had lost her way. I thought of my mother, of my prayers, of the woman I wanted to be. If I built a life on the ruins of another family, What kind of life would that be? It would be cursed. It would be a house built on sand. I pulled my hands away. It felt like tearing off my own skin. No, I said. My voice was shaking, but it was firm. Samira. No, Alistair. We are not those people. You are a father. You are a husband. You are a good man. If you leave them for me, you will eventually hate yourself, and you will hate me for letting you do it. I love you, he said. He was crying, silent tears tracking through the stubble on his cheeks. And I love you, I confessed, the words tasting like ash. Which is why I have to leave. Don't, please. I have to go. Tomorrow. I didn't sleep that night. I packed my life back into the 2 suitcases. I wrote a letter to the children, telling them I had a family emergency. I wrote a letter to Julianne, thanking her for the opportunity. I didn't write to Alistair. I couldn't. I left before dawn. The taxi idled in the driveway. As we drove away, I looked back at the manor one last time. I saw a light flick on in the studio window. He knew. I cried all the way to Glasgow. I cried until I felt hollowed out, empty light. I returned to Marrakesh. The heat hit me like a physical blow. The noise was overwhelming. My family swarmed me with questions, with food, with love. I told them nothing. I said Scotland was too cold, too lonely. But I was different. The silence of Skye had changed me. I wasn't the girl who left to find money. I was a woman who had found her worth. I didn't go back to being the dutiful daughter in the background. I took the money I had saved and I did something scandalously independent. I rented a small riad in the old city. I started a center for women, a place for widows, for divorcees, for young girls who felt trapped. We taught literacy, weaving, business skills. I built a sanctuary. I built a home where the walls were warm. 3 years passed. The sharp pain of Alistair faded into a dull, familiar ache, like an old injury that flares up when it rains. I thought of him often. I wondered if he was painting again. I wondered if he was happy. One afternoon, the bell above my shop door chimed. The sun was blinding outside, so the figure in the doorway was a silhouette. But I knew the posture. I knew the hesitation. It wasn't Alistair, it was Julianne. She looked older. Her hair was softer, less severe. She wore linen, not silk. She looked tired but real. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had she come to scream? Samira, she said. Her voice was quieter than I remembered. Julianne. She walked into the shop, running her hand over a woven rug. It's beautiful here. You built this? Yes? She turned to face me. There was no anger in her eyes, only a strange sad clarity. I didn't know, she said. Not really. Not until you left. When you left the house died. Alistair was a ghost for a year. I gripped the counter. Sorry, Julianne, I never wanted to. Stop. She raised a hand gently. I'm not here for an apology. I'm here to thank you. Thank me. You broke us, she said. And we needed to be broken. Because of you, we had to look at the wreckage. We had to stop pretending. Alistair and I, we separated. It was painful. It was messy, but it was honest. He lives in a cottage near the coast now. He paints every day. He laughs again. And you? I asked. She smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. I quit the firm. I realized I was building skyscrapers because I was afraid of the ground. I'm learning to be a mother to Leo and Freya. I'm learning to be me. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, rectangular package wrapped in brown paper. He asked me to give you this. If I ever found you. She placed it on the counter. He said you'd know what it means. Julianne stayed for tea. We talked not as employer and employee, and not as rivals, but as 2 women who had navigated the stormy waters of life and survived. When she left, she hugged me. It was the first time we had ever touched. When I was finally alone, I opened the package. It was a small canvas. A painting. It was a picture of the view from the terrace at Blackwood Manor. The angry grey sea, the jagged cliffs. But in the center, breaking through the storm clouds, was a single, piercing shaft of golden sunlight hitting the water. On the back, in charcoal, he had written 3 words. Thank you for the light. I sat there in the warmth of Marrakesh, holding a piece of the Scottish winter in my hands. I didn't cry. I smiled. Because I realized then that some people aren't meant to be your forever. Some people are just the weather that forces you to change your course. Alistair wasn't my destination. He was the storm that broke my chains. I walked to the window and looked out at my city. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the red walls. The call to prayer began to echo, weaving through the streets. I took a deep breath. I was alone. I was scarred. And I was entirely beautifully whole. So, if you're listening to this, and you're standing at a crossroads, afraid to leave, or afraid to stay, remember Samira. Remember that sometimes, walking away is the greatest act of love you can commit. And sometimes, the heart has to break so it can finally open up to the person you were always meant to be.